The instant my ex-partner gazed directly at the judge and declared she is unstable. Our daughter is deceived by her. I want full custody. The air seemed to leave my lungs. He spoke so calmly that it felt like an undeniable truth. She appeared to have complete faith in the judge's decision. I wanted to speak, to scream, to cry, to explain, but nothing came out. I sat there, frozen in that hard courtroom chair, my heart racing, as if everything around me had vanished. And all I could feel was the fear of losing the one person I love more than anything in this world. My daughter. Mila sat behind me, holding my mother's hand. She was only 7 years old, but she had seen everything. Her large, round eyes were locked on mine. She could feel it. The sensation was clear to her. It felt like I was drowning and no one was throwing me a lifeline. Damon, my ex-husband, wore a navy blue suit, looking as if he was preparing for a TED Talk. Smooth, composed, and everything was meticulously prepared. The same man who once yelled at me for a wrong takeout order now sat before a judge, looking like the epitome of responsibility. He was captivating. He always had been. That was the issue. The judge asked if I had anything to say. I opened my mouth, but all that came out was a shaky breath. Silence filled the courtroom. My attorney glanced at me, but said nothing. My palms were soaked with sweat. It seemed as though no one saw the reality of the situation, and I was on the verge of losing my daughter. Then, from behind me, a small, clear, and steady voice spoke. I brought a video from my father's phone, Your Honor. I thought, you should watch this video. Everything stopped instantly. The entire courtroom seemed to spin. The judge appeared confused for the first time that morning. Damon's face drained of color. Mila stood up, holding her pink school tablet tightly in both hands. She wasn't crying. She wasn't afraid. She looked braver than I had ever seen her. Mila walked to the front, passing the wooden benches and the man who had tried to separate her from me, and handed the tablet to the judge. I didn't know she had it with her. I didn't know what she had recorded. I didn't know she could record on Damon's phone, but I sensed something had happened. The judge took the tablet, her expression full of curiosity. What is this? She asked. Mila's voice was soft but firm. Last weekend, Daddy said those things while I thought I was asleep, but I wasn't. I heard him and he was really angry. I thought if he didn't believe Mommy, maybe he'd believe me. My heart shattered. My daughter had done what I couldn't. She stood up, facing it all. She revealed the truth. And suddenly, the courtroom where I had felt so small now belonged to us. It was just us, Mila and me, before the court, before the suits, before the silence, before the judge's cold gaze, and before the video. Our home wasn't big, just 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and floors that creaked every time we walked across them after 10 o'clock at night. But Mila never complained. She loved it. She called it our nest. She said the pink curtains in her room looked like a cotton candy cloud. Most evenings, Mila would lie on her bed with her beloved penguin, Pepper, and ask me to read 2 stories instead of 1. I always agreed with her, as my freelance graphic design work from home allowed us to live comfortably. My mother, Carolyn, lived nearby and often helped take care of Mila when I was busy. She was the type of mother who always cared for her children, even if she didn't always express the right emotions. She'd occasionally bring over lasagna, clean my bathroom when I wasn't home, and tell me that I was doing better than I thought, Arya. For a long time, I believed her words. Mila, though only 7, was intelligent, compassionate, and perceptive in a way that made adults uneasy. She always asked questions that made you reconsider what you had said. Once, I was crying in the kitchen at midnight, and Mila didn't ask me anything. She simply brought her blanket over and draped it around my shoulders. That was the kind of child she was. The truth container was a special item for us. When Damon and I first separated, I started the tradition. I told Mila she could record any questions or worries she had and place them in the container. Each evening, we would read 1 note together. Some were innocent, like what causes snoring in people, but others were more painful. If I stay with you, will Daddy stop loving me? I always told her the truth. No matter how hard it was, I never hid it from her. The divorce wasn't easy. Damon prioritized control over custody. On paper, he agreed to joint custody, but in reality, he always sought more rights. He criticized the food I fed Mila, questioned every parenting decision I made, and complained when I was 2 minutes late picking her up. On top of that, Mila would return from weekends with him withdrawn and silent. Sometimes she wouldn't speak to me until Tuesday. I brought it up in court, however. Damon was adept at presenting himself. He transitioned from an undergraduate athlete to a sales executive, the type that elicited laughter and recollected the names of all individuals. He exuded confidence as if it were a second epidermis. During his public appearances, he was beaming with joy. In private, he may find it difficult to control his temper due to a missing charger or spilling juice. I maintained a record. Everything was meticulously recorded. Emails and communications. I had a folder containing a plethora of texts in which he accused me of being unstable. and used derogatory terms about my mother that no child should hear their father use. However, I never disclosed these texts to Mila. I believed that I was safeguarding her. Following a particularly fraught drop-off one evening, Mila inquired as to whether I had ever experienced fear in the presence of Daddy. I hesitated. She gazed down at her cereal and replied, "Yes, however. I believe it is inappropriate for me to express that sentiment." I was unable to fall asleep that evening. I gazed at the ceiling and contemplated whether I had failed her, by not exerting myself more as a fighter or by striving excessively to maintain tranquility. Damon filed for complete custody a few weeks later. He claimed that I was emotionally damaging Mila, that I had lied to her about him, and that I was unable to provide stability. His attorney submitted statements asserting that I was mentally unsuited to co-parent, unreliable, and erratic. My hands trembled as I perused those documents. I was compelled to sit on the ground. Carolyn sat beside me, clasped my wrist, and stated, "You possess the truth. That is sufficient." I desired to have faith in her. However, in court, the truth is not as obvious. It is obscured by evidence and transformed into a strategy. Damon's attorney depicted a woman who was in the process of unraveling. My attorney advised me to refrain from becoming emotive, refraining from speaking unless requested, and refraining from interfering. However, I was simultaneously raging within. Mila witnessed each and every event. I endeavored to conceal each emotion. Every time I murmured, I was assured that everything would be fine. While I was uncertain whether it would be successful, I was unaware that she was monitoring the situation with such intensity. I was unaware that she was eavesdropping. I was unaware that she was engaged in any form of preparation. She was only 7 years old, but somehow she comprehended what none of us had articulated through speech. She was aware that the truth was significant and that the court needed to observe it for themselves. The custody hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. The previous night, I was allowed to sleep only a few hours. Mila had fallen unconscious while holding Pepper, her stuffed penguin, and I remained by her bed until sunrise, observing her. I experienced a sensation of weightiness in my thorax, as if there was an object pressing down on it. I was aware that this was not solely a legal issue. It was a struggle for her life as she knew it. For the one thing I had dedicated every ounce of my being to safeguarding. My mother accompanied us that morning. She wore her church scarf, a silky accessory that she would only remove when she required a boost of fortitude. I believe she was aware that I had a limited amount of energy. The blue dress Mila was wearing was adorned with sunflowers, and she carried her school tablet in her knapsack as she had always done. In the automobile, she did not express herself extensively. She simply gazed out the window, murmuring a melody that I was unfamiliar with. Damon was already present when we entered the courthouse. He was dressed in the same navy suit that he had worn to our wedding rehearsal dinner, however. His smile was devoid of sincerity. It was merely calculated. His attorney, who was impeccably dressed and held a clipboard, stood beside him, speaking in subdued tones that appeared to have been rehearsed. Damon glanced at me and then at Mila. He smiled and waved as if nothing were amiss. Mila did not reciprocate the gesture. The courtroom was reminiscent of a stage, with everything being polished and frigid. Damon and I were both listed on the agenda, however, it was not solely us who were being evaluated. It was the version of me that he had created on paper. The room was enveloped in a subtle tension upon Judge Harmon's arrival. She was a middle-aged woman who was towering and efficient. She gazed intently at Damon's attorney and stated, "You may commence." The picture was promptly painted by his attorney. Damon was characterized by him as a dependable father. He mentioned his consistent employment, his meticulously maintained residence, and his endeavors to protect Mila from Arya's emotional instability. He presented texts that were entirely removed from their context, including correspondence between Damon and myself. I confided in Damon that I was feeling overwhelmed and fatigued in one instance. He presented that as evidence of mental instability. In another instance, I requested that he refrain from raising his voice in the presence of Mila. That was transformed into an assertion that I was manipulative and controlling. I remained seated as the individual with whom I had previously shared an existence, transformed every statement I had ever made into ammunition. Damon responded by contributing his own voice when requested. Calmly and composed, he stated, "She's not feeling well. She informs our daughter that I am the villain. She is perplexed by her. Mila is provoked to fear me by her. I have no intention of removing her out of malice. I am taking this action to safeguard her. She should be safeguarded." The phrase struck me with the force of a strike. Judge Harmon gazed at me. "Ms. Lennox, do you have a response?" I opened my mouth, but nothing emanated from it. The words were pounding in my bosom, begging to be expelled, but my voice betrayed me. I experienced a rapid heartbeat. The weight of my tongue was palpable. I was unable to do anything but gaze at Mila, who was seated behind me, her diminutive legs dangling from the bench. I will never forget the gaze she gave me. She was concerned but not frightened. My attorney cleared his throat and provided a flimsy response regarding my emotional resilience and the inherent nature of distress and single parenting. It was inadequate. It failed to penetrate the depths of the genuine situation. No one mentioned the time Damon cursed at me on the phone while Mila was present in the room. Mila's bedwetting resumed subsequent to his weekends, and no one inquired as to why. None of that was incorporated into their rendition of the narrative. The judge scribbled notes and nodded slightly. Damon then stood up once more and stated, "Your Honor, I desire complete custody. I am of the opinion that my daughter is experiencing emotional distress, and I am of the opinion that shared custody is no longer in her best interest." The walls began to close in on me. I experienced a decrease in my respiration. The arms of my chair were clenched by my palms. I gazed at Mila once more, uncertain as to how I could shield her from the events that were transpiring directly in front of her. That was the moment when Mila released my mother's hand, rose, and proceeded, walking forward. She declined to request authorization. She proceeded without hesitation. She stated, "Your Honor, I have brought a video from my father's phone. It is my opinion that you should watch it." The room remained motionless. Damon's expression became expressionless. My mother exhaled. I shifted in my seat, my pupils widening. Mila stood there, her shoulders erect, her voice constant, and her school tablet in her hand. Judge Harmon gazed at her. "I apologize." Mila elevated the device slightly. "It is from the previous weekend." He was unaware that I was awake, but I was. I listened to his statement and believed it might be significant. No one spoke. It was not Damon, his counsel, or the judge. And for the first time since the hearing commenced, I sensed a change. Mila had brought more than a video. She had introduced the truth to the room, and it was perceived by all. Mila maintained her tablet as if it were a shield as she stood in the courtroom. Although her sunflower dress appeared to be too small, with the hem extending to her knees, she refrained from fidgeting. She refrained from seeking solace in the past. She faced the adjudicator in solitude. She reiterated, "I brought a video from my father's phone. It is my opinion that you should watch it." Judge Harmon peered at the bailiff. "She requested that you bring it to this location." Mila advanced a few steps and presented the device to the bailiff, who subsequently delivered it to the judge. The room was enveloped in silence as if by a close rope. Damon's lips were pressed into a narrow, unreadable line and his jaw was set. His attorney glanced from him to the tablet and back again. They both remained stationary. The judge pressed the play button and turned the screen toward herself. There was a brief period of silence. The sound of ambient noise. The distant murmur that is audible late at night when the world outside has come to a standstill. Next, his voice emerged. Excessive. Unforgiving. He did not employ the same composed, polished tone that he had employed in court mere minutes prior. Damon was undeniably present. He was shouting, "You believe that you are exceedingly intelligent, don't you? Feel free to inform anyone. Observe the outcome. You will ultimately reside in a foster home and are under the impression that your mother is incapable of rescuing you. She is pitiful." A plate clattered and a chair scratched. Mila's voice, trembling and apprehensive, murmured, "I apologize." She was abruptly disconnected by him, refrained from responding. "You are fortunate that I permitted you to visit. I will vow if you speak to her." The judge initiated a suspension. She refrained from responding immediately. She remained seated, gazing at the motionless screen. Damon adjusted in his seat. The judge raised her hand to silence him as his counsel leaned in and whispered something quickly, causing him to panic. "Where did this originate?" she inquired, her voice even. Mila responded without hesitation. He neglected to retrieve his smartphone from the sofa. When I heard him shouting, I was eager to capture the moment. I was terrified, but I believed that if someone heard it, they might believe my mother and me. My thorax contracted. Fear had gripped my daughter. She had devised a strategy and executed it with a greater degree of fortitude than the majority of adults I have encountered. I yearned to rush to her, embrace her, and inform her that she should never have been compelled to endure such an ordeal. However, I refrained from doing so as this moment belonged to her. Damon, his voice abruptly forced and defensive, spoke up. "Your Honor, that recording has been extracted entirely from its original context. I was reprimanding her." The judge stated that she was misbehaving and that it was sufficient. Although her voice was not particularly loud, it penetrated the room with the precision of a blade. Damon promptly ceased speaking. Mila was the subject of Judge Harmon's attention. "I appreciate your courage," she stated. "You are free to return to your seat." Mila nodded and returned. Her pace now slowed as the weight of the moment began to manifest in her shoulders. My mother tightly grasped her and cradled her in her bosom. The judge gazed at me. "Ms. Lennox, are there any additional comments you would like to make?" This time I discovered my identity. "No, Your Honor. I believe my daughter has adequately articulated the situation." The The judge reclined back in her chair after nodding once. After briefly closing her eyes, she reopened them and gazed out across the courtroom. Given this evidence, I am advocating for an immediate evaluation of all custody arrangements. Up until that time, Ms. Lennox will be granted complete temporary custody. Visitation was supervised exclusively for Mr. Blake. Bailiff, please ensure that Mr. Blake is escorted from the courtroom until further notice. Damon was taken aback. It is impossible for you to be sincere. The bailiff, who was advancing, addressed the individual as Sir. Damon appeared to be in the mood for a heated argument, however. He ultimately chose to exit the premises, leaving his counsel to fumble behind him. The courtroom gradually deserted thereafter, however, we maintained our seats. Mila was silent, her head reclining on my mother's shoulder. I eventually rose and proceeded to them, kneeling beside her. I expressed my admiration for your courage. She agreed, but she refrained from speaking. The weight of her actions was beginning to bear on her. She had not recently disclosed the truth. She had defied an individual who had instructed her for years to maintain silence. She had transformed everything in the process. The entire atmosphere changed the instant Damon exited the courtroom under the bailiff's supervision. It was as though someone had opened a window in a room where we had all been holding our breath. I could finally inhale, not completely relaxed, but enough to recall that I still had a voice and a heartbeat. Shortly after issuing her order, the judge departed the bench. Her expression remained constant, however. I observed a distinct change in her irises when she gazed at Mila. A subdued acknowledgement, not astonishment nor pity. Showing respect. I packed Mila's bag methodically, my fingers trembling slightly as I collected our belongings. She was still nestled into my mother's arms, alert but exhausted. The screen of her tablet was still dark after the video, as if it rested on the bench beside her. I extended my hand to grasp hers. Would you like to accompany me? I inquired. She bowed and ascended from the settee. People observed us as we exited the courtroom. A small number of individuals quickly glanced aside. Some individuals maintained their gaze for an extended period. As we passed by, a woman uttered the term brave. I knelt to Mila's height outside the courtroom doors. Her arms were gently supported by my palms. Are you in good health? She shrugged and eventually stated, I did not want to do it. However, I was compelled to. I am aware, I stated. I am exceedingly pleased of you. It was not necessary for you to carry that item alone. She gazed downward at the ground. I was uncertain as to whether they would accept my information. My larynx contracted. Yes, they did. You were able to stand up when no one else could, and because you told the truth. Mila gazed upward at me, her eyes beating with subdued tears. Does this imply that I am not required to return to my father's residence? I embraced her firmly, ensuring that I did not injure her. You are secure. That is the critical factor. The court officers provided us with additional instructions, which included a provisional supervision schedule for Damon. Before any additional access to Mila would be granted, he would undergo an assessment by a court-appointed counselor. It was not yet concluded. There would be an increase in the number of proceedings, documents, and days spent in courtrooms that resembled battlefields. However, the most challenging aspect was behind us. We proceeded directly to my mother's residence that afternoon. I did not wish to be left alone. I did not want Mila to return to our apartment and experience the silence that occasionally resonated too noisily in small spaces. Despite the fact that the weather was mild, my mother prepared soup. She consistently prepared broth on days when she was experiencing emotional distress. When she felt that everything else was out of control, she stated that it provided her with something to agitate. While I completed additional court documentation on the couch, Mila sat at the kitchen table and drew a picture with crayons. She approached me at one point and presented me with the item she had created. The image depicted two palms clasping a heart. She inscribed the phrase, "Truth is brave and large," uneven letters beneath the surface. I wept at that time, not the quiet, concealed kind, but the kind that emanates from the depths of your bosom when the agony has finally been alleviated. Mila refrained from uttering any words. She merely squatted beside me, resting her head against my arm. Before retiring for the evening, we revisited our truth container. It had been accumulating grime for a few weeks. While Mila sat across from me on our bed, I held it in my lap. Would you like to be the first to depart? I inquired. She shook her head and pointed to the folded note that was affixed to the top. I opened it and read it aloud. What occurs when individuals are injured by the truth? I gazed upwards at her. Are you the author of this text? Her voice was subdued and she nodded. I did not wish to cause harm to my father. Rather, I desired to cease experiencing anxiety. I extended my hand and grasped hers. Sometimes the truth can be painful, but silence is more painful. No one was harmed by your actions today. You safeguarded both yourself and us. That is not incorrect. She gazed at the container for a brief period of time before whispering. I believe we should continue with this. I stated that we would do so each evening. I entered the living room that evening and remained by the window. After she had retired for the night, outside, the streetlights wavered. Several automobiles passed by. Life continued. However, the entirety of our world had undergone a transformation. The narrative was no longer under Damon's control. Mila's voice was no longer under his control. And for the first time since the divorce, I felt as though I could take a deep inhalation, as I was aware that I was no longer alone in the struggle. My daughter had entered a world that was significantly heavier than her years. She not only endured it, but she also transformed it. For weeks following Mila's court appearance, the custody hearing concluded. Everything had undergone a transformation by that time. A comprehensive report was submitted by the court-appointed counselor who interviewed Damon. It delineated a concerning lack of empathy for Mila's well-being, emotional instability, and controlling behavior. Naturally, he denied all allegations. However, the video was more persuasive than any of his words. In conjunction with Mila's statement, the court was persuaded to revoke his unsupervised custody rights. I once again sat quietly, holding my breath as the judge read her final decision. However, this time, it was not motivated by dread. Hope was the motivation. I was granted complete legal and physical possession. Damon would undergo twice-monthly visits to a neutral center, which would be staffed by trained professionals under strict supervision. There would be no more murmured threats, no more closed-door weekends, and no more overnight stays. Mila's voice had irrevocably shattered that illusion. That day, we departed the courthouse in stillness. My hand was held by Mila as we descended the lengthy staircase towards the exterior. My mother walked alongside us, her purse swinging against her hip, her eyes scouring the sidewalk for Damon, despite our knowledge that he would not approach. He had not communicated with me since the initial hearing. I was content with that. We visited a small diner that Mila adored later that evening, which featured animal-shaped pancakes and crimson booths. She sat across from me and inquired, "Is it now over?" I did not fabricate information. I stated that it is now secure. We are still in the process of maturing through this experience, however. We are no longer prone to fear. She nodded and used her straw to agitate her chocolate milk. I am relieved that I disclosed the information. Likewise, I am. There are days when I continue to relive the courtroom in my mind. The manner in which Damon's expression altered when Mila spoke, and the fact that her voice, which was both clear and composed, held more weight than any legal argument that was presented that day. I was reminded by my daughter that fortitude does not always result from shouting louder. Occasionally, it is the result of the courage to speak up when you are uncertain that anyone will attend. I resumed therapy in the weeks following the final ruling, not because I was in a state of disarray, but because I finally had the opportunity to reflect on the experiences I had endured. I came to the realization that I had spent an inordinate amount of time attempting to maintain my equilibrium, that I had never acquired the ability to experience security once more. That would require time, however, I now have the opportunity to do so. Mila increased her artistic output. Her designs underwent modifications. In the past, the area was characterized by the presence of dwellings without windows and stormy skies. She's currently depicting trees with roots and children holding hands. A depiction of the truth jar was created by her and affixed to the wall of her chamber. She consistently reminds me to verify it each evening. One evening, I retrieved a note that read, "Do brave individuals continue to experience fear?" I replied yes with a smile. They refused to allow dread to serve as the conclusion of the narrative. A few days later, she composed an additional piece. "Is it possible for children to safeguard adults as well?" I gazed at her and replied, "You did." I am telling this story because there are women who are currently sitting in silence, uncertain if the truth will ever be sufficient, and uncertain if anyone will believe them over the individual who is capable of presenting the correct version of themselves in public, because occasionally the truth does not emerge from a counsel or a courtroom argument. I recount this narrative. Occasionally, it is the result of a child who has witnessed more than is appropriate and has determined that remaining silent is no longer an option. I used to believe that being a decent mother involved protecting Mila from all that was difficult and painful. I now understand that it entails standing by her side during the ordeal, instructing her to speak the truth, allowing her to witness my tears, and subsequently demonstrating how to rise again. We continue to experience challenging days, however, they do not define us. Damon attempted to ensnare us in the terrified versions of ourselves that we are not. We are boisterous when it is necessary. We remain silent when we elect to do so. And we are liberated. We were both saved that day by Mila. She did not merely introduce the truth into that courtroom, the light was brought by her. And for the first time in years, I did not feel as though I was losing her. I experienced the sensation of meeting her for the first time. Thank you for your continued attention if you are still present. It was a challenging narrative to recount, however. I am of the opinion that narratives of this nature must be recounted, because another mother is seated in silence, believing that no one will believe her, somewhere out there. Additionally, it is possible that she simply required this information.